Welcome to Writer Syndrome, podcast about writing from start to finish. This episode will be diving into self-publishing. I'm Russ Capasso, and joining me as always is Tim Letney. And here to help us navigate this topic is our guest, Geoffrey Morrison. He's a writer and photographer about tech and travel for CNET, Wirecutter, and the New York Times. He's also the writer of the self-published best-selling novel Undersea and its sequel, Undersea Atrophia. Geoff, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And where in the world are you right now?
I'm currently in Gold Coast, Australia, which is just south of Brisbane on the East Coast.
Nice. I did some social media stalking of you. I went through your Instagram photos. I have to say, I really like the sphere ones you take that are kind of like MC Escher-esque. Those are pretty cool. So,
yeah, it's with a 360 camera, and I've been a fan of those, and I've been using them since they launched. I'm trying to see if I have one nearby. And I'm one of the few tech writers who actually reviews them. So I actually have 4 of them at the moment. And I try. This is obviously nothing to do with writing, but I traveled like this for a very long time, and I just have one backpack. And so trying to fit everything in this one backpack, along with all my real camera gear and all this other stuff. It's a challenge.
So I mean, I don't know. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into. You've got 2 self-published novels right now, right? Yeah, I mean, kind of give us a little background on that and how you got into going this novel route.
Sure. So professionally, I've been a writer for 22 years, basically, just about. I started in the magazine world, a magazine called Home Theater, and I worked my way up the ranks there and became editor-in-chief of a competing magazine before I was 30. And then that was right around the time of the global financial crisis. So that didn't last too long. And where I came out of that was freelance writing. I basically, as soon as the magazine went under, a number of people reached out and they're like, hey, we love your writing. Can you just write for us? I was like, okay. And that very quickly became kind of exactly what I was really looking for, was just writing and none of the other annoyances. And so as that started taking off, I was able to kind of focus my skills in a way that I hadn't been able to before. Right in there was when I was editor of the magazine, I wasn't writing as much. So that's when I wrote the first book, because I just had, I'm sure you and your listeners know that it's like, I have to write. Like that's the thing. Like I can't just not write something. And so when I was not writing professionally and I was editing stuff and being a boss, I wrote the first book. And I guess I'll talk about that in a minute. And but then as I was freelancing, I wrote the sequel, and that was a lot harder because then I was writing kind of all day long. And then it was, well, when do you clock out the day job and clock in the side job when it's all in your house at the same computer?
Yeah.
So that was a challenge.
So you went from tech reviews into fiction. Did you have a history with fiction already? Were you writing short stories, and had you had other works in progress?
Yes, nothing on a professional front. I've kind of always been a writer of things, and mostly for I'd write something and I'd have my friends read it and yay. And then around 2004, 2005, maybe even earlier than that, I kind of experimented with writing a full-length novel. I'd written shorter stuff, and I wrote a full-length novel, and it's done, but it's a mess. But I learned that kind of taught me I don't really have a background. I don't have an educational background in fiction writing. It's just something that I've kind of taught myself, and part of that was just doing it. And so that first novel taught me how to write Undersea, because I saw the pace, because I'm sure you've talked about this, but figuring out the pacing and length and how the grand picture of it works is something I feel like you just kind of have to do it and say, oh, okay, that's where that breaks, and this is where this goes, and so forth.
I feel like it's very common, right, that writers have this first attempt or this first kind of experiment in writing to kind of, which I'm kind of praying that what I'm writing now isn't mine. I hope I did that in my 20s.
Mine's definitely an experiment.
Yeah, but I think that is important to just do it. through my travels, I meet a lot of people who are maybe at the, like, a lot of people on gap years, or a lot of people who had been doing something and they weren't pleased with it, and so they decided to go travel the world for a while. And I get a lot of that. Oh, I'd like to be a writer, or oh, I want to, I'm a writer. And I try to be very enthusiastic for those people and say, oh, what have you written? Where can I read it? What are you doing? And far too often the response is, oh, well, I haven't written anything yet, but I want to. I was like, well, just do it.
Yeah.
Like, that's really what you have to do. And whether if it's the discipline of it, I think is such a huge aspect. Kind of a tangent, but like that to me, like, how do you write a novel? It's like, well, it's the persistence of it more than anything else. It's getting from word one to the last word, because it's just a lot of time. It's a lot of time in front of a keyboard.
I don't think people understand it's not easy. It's really hard, and it takes a shit ton of time. Yeah. And I think there's this, people see the end product. So like, oh, you wrote a book, you just sat down and did it. They don't see the failed attempts or like the writer's block or just totally screwing up plots and pacing.
Or my other professional life, far too often I come across people who aren't writers, who think writing is like, oh, well, I can write an email, so I could write a book, or I could write a review. It's like, there's such a different level of commitment and focus required. Forget it, even beyond the skill of it, that people who haven't tried it, certainly, I don't think they quite realize of, like, this is months, if not years of your life just to finish it the first time. Not to mention drafts and edits and, everything else, which certainly we'll talk about when I talk about my third book and how long I've been working on that. But we'll get there.
So you said you didn't go through any like formal like fiction writing training like that. Was there, for your first book, and even now, I guess, is there any like books about writing you've picked up to like kind of learn that structure and like the pacing and stuff like that, like Save the Cat or something like?
Some of it, and like, I don't want to say that I didn't have. I had a couple classes in college, but I don't feel like I learned anything. I don't see a direct connection between that and the writing the actual books, right?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I took creative writing classes, and it was just like, I don't know. They were a joke. Like, I was happy to take them, but they were very supportive, like too supportive. I learned nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It was neat to have, for me, especially the last one that I did, and I guess it was my senior year. Or I took I think it was two, and one of them was great because it was like a place that I could read stuff that I'd written to get feedback, and that was cool. And then there was another one where there was just people in the class who were just because it was senior year, so arrogant about what they had done. And it was just, there was that other side of it. I was like, wow, I'm going to be dealing with people with you my entire life. You're terrible, but you think you're awesome. I can't handle that. I'm bad with that. But to answer your book question, I know it's an obvious one, but Stephen King's On Writing is super handy.
Yeah, we've referenced that a few times.
Yeah, I think above all else, just because, obviously, talk about prolific. He talks a lot about just the like we were just talking about. He talks a lot about the mundane aspects of it, where you just gotta do it. Yeah. There's a story, and now that I'm on the spot, and forgive me, it's almost midnight, but I can't remember who the writer was, but there was a story. He was one of those famous drunk writers of the 20th century. And the story goes is that his wife would wake him up at 6 a.m., still hungover, and he would swing at her and just swear at her and just like make life miserable. And she would lock him in his office that had nothing in it except for a typewriter. And she would wait until eventually she heard him start typing, and then she would bring him coffee and breakfast and so forth. And then around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she'd bring him lunch. He would have written something, and then he'd get drunk until he'd pass out. But he did that, and they're like, but he got books done. It's like, he got it done. Like, he got it done. That was the process.
Yeah. He had a little help. He had someone literally locking him in a room to do it, but he got there.
Sometimes that's what you need if you don't have the discipline to do it. I met a self-published writer who had a number of kids, and that blew my mind that she was able to do so many of these books. And she's like, I get up really early and I have an hour to myself before the kids get up, and that's my hour to write. So I just get it done, and then the kids are up, and then I got to put them blah 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 blah. And
what helped me with the King book was just you said the just doing it, right? Don't go back and edit. Don't be scared about it. Just go from start, go all the way to the finish, and then go back. And at least you've got something that you can hone and craft after the fact. And that's what the trap I fell into in my 20s, where I would write 20 pages, I would edit 20 pages. I never finished, right? So that King book was so helpful in that regard.
Yeah, and that was like when that first book that I'm not going to ever publish. That was what I was learning there as well. Was how do I do this? And for sections of it, that's what I would do. It's like, okay, well, I wrote those 3 pages yesterday. Let me go back and fix those. And then all of a sudden you've spent 2 hours fixing something. You haven't made any actual progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So nowadays it's just, I bang it out. And the rule I had for Undersea, and again, because I wasn't writing full time, was 1,500 words a day, and that's, I see now that's actually a pretty heavy lift. That's pretty big. I couldn't do that these days. So for my current book, 500 words a day, which is obviously a very low bar, and if someone hasn't written a book before, I mean, we're talking, that's basically 2 pages. Like that's not a lot, but it was enough where I didn't feel overwhelmed starting it that, whatever time I was able to do it that day, I could feel accomplished. And as Hemingway said, leave something in the tank for the next day. And then I was still slowly making progress to those 100,000 words.
When you start, Geoff, do you, and this is kind of how the sausage is made, and if you don't want to answer, don't feel obliged to.
No, I like these questions. But I know exactly where you're going with this.
Work on the beats, or do you have like a solid outline, and do you go through all your beats, or do you just kind of let it roll and then maybe craft it after the fact? So
with Undersea and Undersea Atrophia, I was definitely seat of the pants, and then I would go back and fix stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't entirely that. Like, I see now that it'd be a lot easier if I was more of a planner. But when I say seat of the pants, I have a lot of this just kind of in RAM. I don't start writing if I don't know the ending. I don't start it without, I need to know the arc of it, the characters. Like I keep all of that in RAM. So I don't really call myself a plotter because I don't
Your own RAM, like your head?
Yeah. I don't call myself a plotter in so much as I don't know what each chapter is going to be about before I get in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I know what the pieces of it are going to be and that arc. And I feel is healthy that there's occasionally surprises where I get to a point where, oh, that character would actually do this. That's wild. Okay.
Yep.
And I also kind of like being in that zone and just having it happen. It's like I'm watching a movie. All of that's kind of important to me. And when I've tried to plot stuff out with a more detail, I start getting really bored and I can't quite get to the point where I want to write it.
Mm.
So for me, it's more like I have to do it that way. Otherwise, it's just not going to get done. I've talked to other indie writers who are the exact opposite. They're like, no, I need to plan it all out ahead of time. And that's how it works. And some of them are significantly more prolific than I am. So maybe that is, there's no right or wrong answer, obviously, but it is, like we've been saying, it's figuring out what your process is
Mm-hmm.
important, and not feeling like, oh, this isn't the right way to do it. I think if the end product works, how you got there is not quite as important as what it is.
You mentioned the tank. You still have a little left in your tank, maybe to go on and write the next day. It got me thinking about the travel writing and the traveling you do, right? I think so much of writing is filling your tank. Sometimes you're on empty. It seems like your travel must give you a lot, of fodder, like a lot of things to put on the page. Do they work in that kind of symbiosis? Like you're traveling and you're writing, or do they, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's almost like you're teeing me up for a question I figured we'd get to later. So my third book is not related to the first two, much to the chagrin of several people I know. And it is sci-fi, but many of the locations and even a few of the people in it are based on places I've been and people I've met. And it's twisted obviously into a sci-fi way. So like I'm in I describe something that's very much like Hong Kong, but it's a space station. So it has the aesthetics of Hong Kong, not explicitly. I'm not being like, and this is Hong Kong, but it's in space. Obviously not. But like there's it's influenced by, for sure. And I think that's part of why I wrote that book, was to talk about some of the experiences that I've had that don't quite fit into a standard nonfiction narrative or article or whatever.
That's great. And to be able to pull on that experience of standing in the space, of you standing in Hong Kong, as opposed to what I would have to do, which was look at a picture, like imagine it. So
which does help, but it's the sights and it's the sounds and the smells, the feel of it. Part of, like, at one point the character is standing in one place and the people are just flowing around him, and that's just you feel that when you're in some of these places where it's just this sea of humanity going about their lives, and I'm just this viewer, interloper, whatever you want to call it, in their space, trying to not be in the way, but probably still being in the way anyway. And also just because of places that I've traveled, no one can fit in everywhere, but I stand out in most places. So it is being that other in a places, which is, I love that feeling. And I think that helps my writing as well, of just constantly feeling like an observer and an outsider in places. That makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And I think why some people don't like traveling, but for me, I love it and I thrive on it. It's just a piece of the puzzle, I guess.
I want to go back into like the self-publishing side of things, maybe a little nitty-gritty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But
Sure.
So yeah, what made you decide to self-publish versus querying? And did you consider querying at all, or was it just self-publish was the path?
So it was more of the time that it all happened, at least at first. So I'll answer your question with a longer answer than you might have expected. So when I first published Undersea, that was right kind of during that financial crisis, and at the time I did reach out to a few places, and of the not that I got responses that often, but at the times that I did, the general gist of it was no one was taking on new clients. It was that everyone is terrified for their jobs. Companies are closing left and right. It was a terrifying time, as I'm sure you guys remember. So no one was going to take a risk on someone who had never written before, or anyone new. And so it was like, well, I could wait this out, or I could just do it myself. And I had access to a creative art team through my magazine. I found a cover artist. I searched for and then found a cover artist. I had a copy editor that I could pay. And so I had all these pieces. Basically, the only thing I was missing, and this is the only thing you really miss, I think, self-publishing, is like I had no publicity aspect of it. But at the time, I wasn't really thinking that far in advance. I was really just like, I'd like to put this out and see what happens. So that's basically what I did. And it was great because through my tech contacts, I was able to, so at this time I started writing for CNET at the time, and they let me put at the end of all my articles, a little blurb. Oh, he's written a book, like here. That has been a very steady source of sales for me. And then kind of through other people, I was part of the first story bundle, which obviously was a huge success, and it kind of, I think we all got sales separate from story bundle for some reason as well. That was kind of the first time I hit one of the bestseller lists, and it did well enough that a publisher actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to publish your book for real." And so then I was picked up by them. They did a whole nother edit and a little tweaks on the cover and so forth, and then they republished it, and then that showed up through them. They were able to this is the publicity part. They were able to do a thing where if you liked certain books and you had a Kindle that had the advertising on it, my book would show up on like when you turned on your Kindle.
It's nice.
Bam, bestseller list again. Like, okay, sweet, I'll take that. Then there was another time where it was a similar thing where it was just like they were advertising through something, and Amazon was experimenting using my publisher as like part of the experiment, and so boom, more sales for that. That did great up until about a month before I was set to publish the sequel, when the company just folded. It was basically like Monday, something's not right. Tuesday, everybody's fired. But all the rights reverted back to me. Everything was basically done at that point. So I was like, okay, well, I have all the files. So I just spent weeks kind of redoing everything and then republishing the first book myself, and then publishing the second book myself. And then I haven't really sought out any representation or publisher since then. I've thought about it with the new book, and maybe I will. But also, I really enjoy doing a lot of this stuff myself and having the control, especially for the cover artist, but just kind of the control of having doing these things myself, and the time of it. Like, if I want to, I could put the book out this year. Whereas if I'm dealing with a publisher, it's going to take way longer than that, year, 18 months, maybe, as this stuff starts churning its way through. So I don't know. I mean, there's certainly pros and cons. And then again, it is the publicity aspect, that is the marketing aspect, that is by far the thing you lose. And if you don't know how to do that yourself and don't want to put the effort into it yourself, that's the biggest part. There's lots of books out there. So how do you differentiate, and how do you find that audience?
So what was that like then? Did you run like BookBub or Amazon or Facebook ads and stuff like that? Like, did you have like a different launch, but it's kind of two separate questions, but like different launch plan compared for the first book and the second book? Like, was there anything behind that you did, or did you wait to get the book completely done and say, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and do all this other marketing and promotion?
Yeah. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it. I think a better approach would probably be to just be thinking about that, or get a plan and process as you're in the end stages, because that is, if you want your book read, you're going to have to get it in front of eyeballs. It's pretty unlikely you're just going to have it magically show up places. So for me, I mean, it was more at the time, it was just the brutality of losing the publisher and then having to do it all myself. It's really just kind of, I want to get this thing out there. Yeah. And also because it was a sequel, I wasn't expecting much, because your audience for the sequel is just the people who liked the first book. So you go from like the world for the first book to only the people who've read your first book. Yeah. So I never really expected it to be, I wanted to finish the story. I still do. There's going to be another book. But it was like, it's just for those people who liked that book. And I've had enough people reach out to me, and it's always wonderful when people do, that are curious. They're like, oh, I hope there's a sequel. I hope there's another one, and so forth. So it's really just writing it for the fans at that point. And that's fine. I have nothing wrong with that. I just didn't. So I experimented with some Facebook advertising, and that went nowhere. I experimented with some Amazon numbers, and it was always a losing proposition. If I put in $500, I might make $100 worth of sales. That is not scalable. And around the time where I was better off, like, okay, maybe I can focus and figure out how these numbers work. I just kind of got bored with it. And I hate to say it, but it was like, I'm not going to make $1 million off this book. And I don't need it to support me. It's like, it's there if people want to read it. So, and I made enough money off the first book that it was, the ego aspect is certainly, that's done. Okay. More people read it and liked it than I ever thought they would. So what more else is there on this piece? Yeah. So yeah, and I know there has to be a way to do it. And I've certainly spoken to a few authors who, it does work for them, that they can, okay, if I put in 1,000, they'll make 1,100. So they can scale it. But that's a tough proposition. And it certainly takes a dedication and a skill set that might not be one that the average writer has.
Did you only publish through like Amazon's KDP, or using like Ingram Spark or any other service to get out to like other locations? I saw you're also listed on like Barnes and Noble or something as well for the first.
Yeah,
book.
I was. So with when I first published Undersea, I tried to cast the widest net, and so I did Amazon, I did Barnes and Noble, I did can't remember the name of it. So a bunch of the different platforms to try to get out there. And so then when I republished them, after my publisher went away, I kind of took stock of like where was I making my money? Because that was another good thing about my publishers, that they would send me reports of like, this is how much you made on Amazon, this is how much you made on Barnes and Noble, and so forth. And it got down to like 80% of my sales were on Amazon, 10% were Barnes and Noble, and then 10% were everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And so looking at my own labor and time, what's the most worthwhile thing for me to do? And so I just like, I'm just going to put it on Amazon. And if people don't want to support Amazon, that's fine. But this is where it's going to be.
It's kind of this is going to be an interesting question now, because you started out with your first book as actually going through a publisher and then having to republish, self-publish. And then the second book you've done all self-published. What was like the biggest kind of obstacle, I guess, you faced, like maybe that first time, and then maybe versus like the second time, or things get easier for you the second time around?
The thing that was certainly a learning curve was trying to get all the formatting to work. And I think this might be it needs to be done anyway, but also for me, coming from a magazine background, like having the layout correct was super important to me. Like, this needs to look like a book.
Yeah.
And at the time, and I'm going to be really curious, I hope it's gotten better since the last time I did it. But at the time, like the ways to do that were all incredibly archaic, really just difficult to use. And so you go through, you've written it, and you think you're done. You think it's okay, this is how it's going to look, and then basically Amazon is like, no. That's you fool. That's not how this looks.
I'm putting ampersands here.
Yeah, like you need to do this, and it needs to be broken up. Like, oh my god! And so then you're doing hours of find and replace for spacing and piece in tab and all these things, only to find out you missed something, and then it's just a wall of text for 50 pages or something. So, so that was like, that's certainly the most time. And then after you do all of that, to then also want to put it in an actual analog form and formatting it for an actual book is a whole, now you're going to do it all over again in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So I'm not looking forward to, I honestly, like, I'm at the point where I would be willing to just pay someone else to do it.
Well, I think it is easier now. I think there are, I don't know if you're on a Mac or PC, but there's programs called Vellum and Atticus, I think, that are like pretty good.
That's great. Well, that's good to know, because that was something I was worried about. I feel like people are more interested or perhaps willing to call out typos in a self-published book, because they're either consciously looking for them, subconsciously looking for them, or gleefully finding them. And we're like, ha ha, I caught this. They said 2 and they meant 2. Ha, you suck. I could do this better because I want to be a writer, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's just going to happen. Like, I've found typos in every book I've ever read. Like, it's 100,000 words. One of my favorite authors is Neil Stephenson. His stuff's 1,000 pages long sometimes. Like, you're going to find a typo. It's just it's going to happen. Related to that, just the self-publishing versus the published stuff. And this is not a scientific result, only tests that I've done. But so I have my book. Actually, I can't even remember what it is now. I think it's at $2.99. It was at $4.99 for a while, which obviously for a self-published book is reasonably high. As an experiment, I dropped the price to 99 cents for a couple months. And sure enough, the sales go up as the price drops. The reviews went down. And then I put the price back up, and the reviews went up again. And that's fascinating to me. And I've tried to figure out why that might be. And it could be a fluke, but it was consistent. And I almost think it's like when you sell something for cheap or give it away for free, people are going to think that's the value.
I agree.
But if you charge something that's a higher price, they're going to think that that's the value.
Yep.
And I feel like I can get away with a slightly higher price because, like, all right, here's my bona fides. You know, I write for the Times, I write for the Wall Street Journal, I've done this, blah, 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 blah. So my book's going to be $3, it's going to be $5, whatever it is. Or just do it and see what happens. Like, maybe even if you don't have that background, he's like, no, I spent a year of my life on this thing. I spent 3 years of my life on this thing. It's $5. And if you don't get, you know, I don't know, $5 is such a deal to me, like, for a book that you're going to read for days or weeks. So I don't know. That's just a side thing of like, don't go cheap on these things, because there might be this unknown cost, especially since so many of these cheap and free ebooks are terrible, because these people are just, they don't even get proofread. They're just, here, I wrote 30,000 words and now you have a book. You know? Yeah. I don't know if the air quotes translate to podcast. I was doing air quotes on the book, on that book one right there. Because 30,000 words, I don't know, I'd call that a book. That's like a novella to me, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and this kind of leads into, I don't know at this point if it's a question or not, but like thinking about this, and we talked to MD about this as well, is just this, is there still a stigma attached to self-publishing because of that, you know, and people will see like, oh, it's self-published, $4.99 or 99 cents or 99 or whatever. They've got all of a sudden, like out of the gate, these opinions about whether the quality is going to be there. And
I think that is absolutely the case. And I think it always will be for a certain type of person. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm at the point of my career, or I'm at the certain age, but I don't, wait, can we swear on your podcast?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Then I don't know, fuck those people, I guess. You know, it's like, if you don't want to read a self-published book, don't. I don't care. Don't read my book. I really don't care. It is. I do not have the ego for that. I don't care. I don't care if you read my other stuff either. There was I'm not going to mention his name because I don't agree with his politics, but this guy wrote this book a long time ago that was a compilation of all the letters to the editor that he got. And I would typically politically be on the side of the people who wrote the letters, but that's beside the point. But the name of the name of the book stuck with me, especially through my magazine years, which was "Cancel Your Own Goddamn Subscription." And I love that so much because I would get emails at the magazine all the time, which was like, and I didn't like what you said about this thing, so I want you to cancel my subscription. I'm like, no,
you cancel it.
Do it yourself. What the fuck do I care? Like, that's a you problem, my friend. That is not a me problem. And oh, by the way, we have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. I don't need your money. I don't need your attitude. So that's the thing with the book stuff too. It's like, if you think that a self-published book can't have the quality of a published book, okay, that's your opinion, man. None of my business. Don't read my book then. I don't care.
I'm also curious to see like the impact that has, you know, when you try to send out a book to like maybe like ARCs or something, you know, advanced reviews and stuff to somewhere, like as a self-published author, like is there going to be like we're going to pass on that because it's not coming from one of the big or any traditionally published house, you know?
Well, and that's going to be a problem. And I think that is actually, I think, perfectly valid, because they're probably already have way too many things to read just from the publishing houses. Yeah. So if they're going to open that up to self-published with no background or no reason to do it, there's not enough hours in the day and there's not enough staff. Yeah. So, you know, the third-party reviews or the random reviews that I got on the internet, obviously that blew up after Story Bundle. It's just people who just wanted to read it and also happen to have a book review blog, which is great. You know, I mean, not that necessarily blogs exist anymore, thanks Facebook, but those people still do. I mean, hey, maybe they do it on YouTube now. So those things, there is still places to get stuff reviewed like that. But then, I mean, again, we're all tying this back to the original thing. It's like, it's the marketing, it's the publicity aspect. That's what you lose. That's absolutely what you lose. And it's always going to be a struggle.
We had such a great chat with Geoff. We couldn't fit it all in one episode. So stay tuned for part 2 in the coming weeks. But thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the episode and think someone you know would too, let them know. If you have a topic idea or feedback, find us on Twitter at writer_syndrome or head over to writersyndrome.com for all our episodes and contact info. Till next time, keep writing.